Welcome to New York Game.
All right, this week's episode, we're coming to you from Madison Square Garden right after the Knicks Game 7 loss to the Indiana Pacers, a disappointing end to the Knickerbocker season. I'm joined by the great SNY Knicks Insider, Ian Begley. Ian, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Dexter. How are you, man?
I'm doing okay. We're doing a little bit better than the Knicks are today. 130-109 loss to the Pacers in Game 7. Ian, let's start with this. When we look at this Game 7, what went wrong for the Knickerbockers?
You know, Indiana hit a ton of shots, and shots that you wouldn't expect them to hit at the rate that they did. Now, was that because the Knicks defense was a step slow? I was a little bit surprised with the speed at which they were moving, or the lack of speed at which they were moving early on in this game. Obviously, OG Anunoby's hurt. Obviously, Josh Hart is compromised. But the rest of the group, it seemed like they weren't flying around like they usually do. And now the Knicks cut the lead to 7 in the third quarter. 4 turnovers in the next 2 minutes. That leads directly to 9 Indiana points, and that was the game. They never got really closer, never really threatened after that.
Never really threatened after that. And you said red-hot shooting from the Pacers in this one. Now, Ian, you were in the locker room with the players following this Game 7 loss. Obviously, players very dejected. What was the overall mood you got from the team, and how does this loss motivate them going forward?
Yeah, I think there was, not positivity in like the idea that they're happy that they lost or the season's over, just positivity in the fact that they can see something to build off of here. They see a foundation. They see the idea that, hey, if the franchise can make the right moves from here, we could be right back here. We could make it further. They feel like there's a good nucleus that's been put in place here. So I think that's where the optimism is from. And a lot of the players said, hey, it's just hard to overcome all these injuries. And I think that's part of the reason that we're seeing this season end now. Just so many injuries. They tried to make up for them, but in the end, I think that's what caught them.
Yeah, injuries, and you bring that up. That transitions us to the next thing that we're going to talk about here. Knicks with another injury in this game. Point guard Jalen Brunson, he exited the game, Ian, in the third quarter. Then reports came out in the fourth quarter, fractured hand. Knicks announced that he'd be done for the game. How do you think this affects Brunson moving forward?
Yeah, I think that, it's a broken bone, so anytime you have a broken bone, you want to take care of it. You want it to heal properly. I'm sure they'll take the proper precautions, but I don't think this impacts anything. Big picture for Brunson, he's not on that Olympic roster, so it's not like he has to concern himself with going to Vegas and playing with those guys in training camp, and so it'll just be a process of rest and recovery, surgery maybe, but I don't think in a big picture sense you have to be worried about Brunson next season because of this.
Okay, so not worried about Brunson with that, but obviously a tough end to his season there. Another guy we got to talk about in terms of injuries, OG Anunoby, hadn't played since Game 2, gave it a go in Game 7, but he only lasted 5 minutes. What did you make of what we saw from OG in the limited time, and how do you think his injury is going to affect him going forward this offseason?
Yeah, he just couldn't move. He was not moving well. He really wanted to play all along the day before the game. He just was not insistent on playing, but made it clear that he wanted to give it a go, so he did. But once he got out there, he made those 2 3-pointers early on, which certainly got the crowd going. But on the defensive side, he just wasn't moving well. And so Tom Thibodeau made the decision to keep him out. As far as what it means moving forward, he's going to have a lot of time to heal this hamstring properly. It's a tricky injury, so he'll have several months now to figure it out and to get it fully strengthened going into next year.
Yeah, and he's going to need to do that. Speaking of tricky injuries, Josh Hart, he's got one too, abdominal strain that he suffered in Game 6, but he started, gave it a go, was pretty active. What did you make of his performance and what we saw from Josh Hart in Game 7?
Yeah, just more of what you've seen from Hart all year, just playing 100%, giving the Knicks everything he has, every possession, and even with that injury that is really limiting, he came out and he played very hard. It's just more of the same from Hart, and it's the reason why he's so valuable to this Knicks team, what he does on a stat sheet and what he does intangibly, something like this, where he's willing to lay it out on the line in a Game 7.
Definitely seen that from him all throughout this season. Now, looking back at this series, Ian, and looking back at this whole season, there's going to be some Knicks fans that are going to look at the series and say, hey, the Knicks had a missed opportunity in Game 3. If they had won that game, they could have won the series. They end up losing it in 7 after having a 2-0 lead, blowing the 3-2 lead. Is this one you think this team looks back on as a missed opportunity, one they could have had with that Game 3 victory that was there in hand?
Yeah, look, let's see how this plays out over the next few years, right? There's a good chance, I think, you look back at this season and you say this was the Knicks' best chance to get through because of the other teams in the East, because of the pathway they had to Boston. And if they were healthy, I'm sure they get through to the Eastern Conference Finals, and then they make it competitive against the Celtics team. But they were not healthy, so they didn't have that opportunity. But maybe, who knows what happens in the offseason. Maybe Philadelphia gets stronger. Milwaukee, you never know. Maybe you look back at this and say, hey, this was a really strong opportunity for the Knicks. They didn't get a chance to take advantage of it because of injuries.
It's an interesting point. You never know what your best chance is going to be in any season. But, Ian, you bring up the offseason, right? And this is an offseason that's going to be, you would think, kind of busy for the Knicks. Let's start with one of the things you got to talk about with the Knickerbockers. That's the head coach, Tom Thibodeau. Got this team to the playoffs for the third time in 4 years. What's the deal with him and his future? Will he get a contract extension, do you think?
I mean, you listen to what Jalen Brunson had to say about Tom Thibodeau after this game, which is very complimentary of the head coach, and I think that tells you all you need to know about the idea that they're obviously going to engage in serious conversations about an extension. Whether they get to one will be up to the Knicks and Tom Thibodeau's side, but, I would assume they get there because of the success that you referenced, Dexter. 3 playoffs in 4 years, really something you haven't seen from a Knicks coach since Jeff Van Gundy. And so I'm sure they're going to talk about it. I would assume they get to a number that everybody feels comfortable about. Just listen to Jalen Brunson. He said that the locker room has Tom Thibodeau's back, and that's something that is valuable in the NBA, as you know. So the Knicks, I'm sure, are going to keep him around.
Yeah, the team seems to like him. They're really behind him, and that should bode well for the team going forward in the future. But as you know, Ian, in the offseason, also about the key free agents that the team has, one of the most notable key free agents that they'll have is Isaiah Hartenstein. How do you see that situation playing out, along with other key free agents who they have coming back to this roster?
Yeah, I think there's teams out there. You look at Orlando, who had interest in Isaiah Hartenstein last time he was a free agent. They have significant cap space. There are teams with cap space that I could see having strong interest in Hartenstein, but I think at the end of the day, he will be back here because the Knicks will pay him as much as they're able to, given the salary cap constraints. They'll give him, I'm sure, as much as they can, as long as they can in that deal, and I think he'll come back here. I think he wants to be back, so unless some team comes in and offers him $25 million a year, way above what the Knicks can offer, I would assume he's back.
He's a key guy who the Knicks would definitely like back. We'll see if that happens there. One other thing, I know we'll be talking to you about this a lot in the upcoming weeks. That's the NBA draft. The Knicks will have 2 first-round picks, assuming they don't deal them in this coming draft. Do you see the team looking to select to add young talent to this roster, or do you see them trying to keep that flexibility and try to make another move?
Yeah, based on recent history, I would think that they're more likely to trade these picks because you look at this roster, you look at who's likely coming back, and you say to yourself, is there a place for a rookie on the roster? Is there a spot? Are there minutes for a first-round pick on this roster? With Tom Thibodeau as head coach, probably not. And so I think they're more likely to deal these picks. But we've seen them be patient in trade opportunities. We've seen them protect these first-round picks in several different discussions, different trades since Leon Rose got here. So I'd never want to assume anything, but I think they're more likely than not to use these picks in a trade.
All right, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the team around the draft. One other thing that fans are going to want to keep their eye on, Ian, in terms of the offseason, trades and free agency. Come June 30th, do you expect this team to be active in either of those departments, or at least they're going to be making the phone calls? How active do you think the Knicks will be on both of those fronts this offseason?
Well, I think the priority will be the guys who are free agents, bringing those guys back, the OG Anunobys and the Isaiah Hartensteins of the world. And then you talk about trades, the market really gets influenced by what happens in the postseason. So, Minnesota obviously still alive. People are going to keep an eye on that situation. Financially, because of the big contracts that they have on the books. But if Minnesota continues to progress, you would think that they want to keep that core intact.
Right.
Now, you look at elsewhere, Philadelphia, they're going to be a big spender. So there's going to be different scenario situations that come up that maybe we don't even know about at this moment. But I do think they'll be aggressive if the opportunities are there. It starts with OG Anunoby, though, for them, getting him back and then seeing what opportunities are there for trades.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting offseason. I think it's going to be a pretty active one in terms of NBA. Last thing for me, and we appreciate the time. When you look at this Knicks season, we heard Jalen Brunson after Game 7 say that doesn't think that this is a successful season. the goal is to win a championship, as is for most teams trying to compete here. How do you view what the Knicks did this season and also what you think they can be in the future? Is this team headed in the right direction, and do you view this season as a success?
Yeah, I think they met expectations this season, and you might look at the injuries and say they exceeded expectations to a degree. And they made the second round last year, made the second round this year, but you look at who was out this year, and I would say that the players that they asked to step up in place of these injured guys really showed that they can do so. In a big picture sense, though, Jalen Brunson has this team in a really good place. Now, there's decisions to be made moving forward, as we just hit on, but the idea that there's a foundation here, a nucleus here from which to build, I think is encouraging, and it's something that not many Knicks teams could say over the last 2 decades. I think they're in the best shape that the Knicks have been in since '99, since they made that second round 2 years in a row and Jeff Van Gundy was here. So that's saying something. I think that's a credit to the group, but also Jalen Brunson really spearheading it.
No, I think it absolutely is saying something. I know it's hard to find positivity after a loss in Game 7, but I think there's a lot to be optimistic about if you are a Knicks fan. That does it for us here on New York Got Game. Got to thank my guy, Ian Begley. I never covered a Game 7 before until today. It was my first Game 7 that I covered.
It was mine too.
Was it yours too? Okay, so I wasn't alone. I thought I was alone here. I wasn't alone. Ian covered me. He's been doing a great job covering the Knicks and New York basketball throughout. Ian, we'll talk more.
Sounds good, Dexter.
All right. Appreciate y'all for joining us.
And thanks for watching New York Got Game. Boom shakalaka.